Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
Are you a film fan who loves the ultimate home video experience? Look no further than The Disconnected. Your host, Ryan Verrill, is your go-to source for the latest and most accurate information on home video releases, exclusive interviews with industry insiders and filmmakers, and has established a thriving community where every film and physical media enthusiast feels welcome. From hidden gems to blockbuster hits, The Disconnected brings you insider knowledge and a welcoming space to share your love of cinema. Watch every Thursday night at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific for the live announcements show and follow The Disconnected on social media to stay updated. Subscribe to The Disconnected on YouTube or on the podcast provider of your choice and dive into a world where every movie night is an adventure.
We made this.
Hello everyone and welcome to Pick Up a Podcast and our first episode of 2019. And today we are going to be talking to Mark Begley, who is part of the Wake Up Heavy podcast. Hey Mark, how are you?
Hi Kurt, nice to be here.
Good, nice to speak to you finally. I know that you were really one of the first people who jumped on when I put the call out for podcasters to come on, and I know there's been a bit of a gap before we get to speak to each other, but I do appreciate you getting in touch just before Christmas there, and I'm sure that we're going to have a great little discussion on your podcast. Wake Up Heavy, that is an interesting name, and I'm just wondering, one, what the podcast is about. I know what it's about, but what is the podcast about, and where did the name Wake Up Heavy come from?
The name came from a journal entry of mine. I got into the habit of doing that when I was in London for a semester of school. Actually, I think I kept 3 journals, one for myself. We had to keep one for the program, and then I think I had another little kind of date book. And I kept doing it off and on for years after, and it was in reference to imbibing in certain beverages and how things had changed with my reaction to that the next morning. I used to get the spins when I was younger and then kind of would just pass out and then have a bad hangover. And then it just turned into a physical sensation of waking up and kind of feeling like gravity was pulling you down a little bit extra harder. Oh, okay. So I just wrote down Wake Up Heavy and liked it and used it for a literary magazine I did in the early 2000s. When it came to do this, I just stuck with it. It has no reference or bearing to movies in general or horror movies specifically. It's my roller skate skinny line that I always wondered what that band's name was from, and then I found out that it was a sentence in Catcher in the Rye, and I just thought it was the greatest thing ever.
Fantastic. Okay, so you mentioned about those literary things there. I mean, what were those magazines about? Were they about films or?
No, it was strictly poetry and short stories. I was a huge fan of Charles Bukowski, and I think the first magazine I did, another kind of interesting name, is called Smell Feast. And I did that with a buddy, and then I kind of took it over and got a lot of the small press poets that had published alongside Bukowski, and I was kind of gearing myself up to write him a letter to submit, because he just submitted to every magazine that would take his poems. Before I could do that, he passed away. And at the time, I was writing as well and submitting to these same kinds of magazines. And then that all kind of died off. That was, I think, in the mid-90s. And then I stopped doing it and then got the kind of itch to go back to that and picked up the Wake Up Heavy moniker for the second literary magazine. And at that point, I started contacting the Black Sparrow Press poets that had kind of been published alongside Bukowski. And so it was a lot of that early 2000s Black Sparrow Press group. And the main guy that I ended up publishing a bunch of was Fielding Dawson. And he passed away, and that kind of killed the magazine. And then after that, I dabbled in some letterpress printing. I did some cards and prints back in, I guess, the mid-2000s for a few years, and had that actually as my job for a while, and didn't use the Wake Up Heavy name for that. When it came time to do this, I just kind of naturally gravitated back to that name.
Yeah, so the podcast, you started that late August last year, I think it was. The main feature of it, from what I've seen, I know you've mentioned within the podcast that you may venture out a little bit from it, is horror. I mean, what do you perceive horror to be, and why specifically horror?
Well, I guess it was because that was what I was watching so much of. When I was a kid, that's what we rented all the time. It was almost exclusively horror movies. The Thing, I think we must have rented almost weekly or bi-weekly back in the early to mid 80s. And so that and Halloween and all the ones that I've done, like Phantasm and stuff like Rosemary's Baby and The Shining, it just seemed to be what we rented. Or if you went to a sleepover or somebody had a birthday party or a Halloween party, it was horror movies. You know, as I grew up, I kind of watched them less and less and started getting into cult films and art films and foreign films. And I think in probably around 2013, I started meeting a friend of mine who had been in New York and LA for a few years and had come back to Fresno. And we started to make a point of meeting every week. And then it turned into watching movies, and it was just any movie at that point. And then when we would watch horror movies, it just seemed like it was more enjoyable. So that kind of became the trend. And then I just stuck with it. And I thought, you know, all these years, I've missed a lot of these movies, and they're, I guess, the most enjoyable to watch for me. They encompass, you know, they take all of the aspects of film, special effects, the music's very important to movies, to the horror movies. And
is that the dog from The Thing?
Yeah. I hope not. Yeah, and then I kept seeing, I guess because of Facebook, following Nerdist or other groups like that, where they would talk about new horror, and I thought, oh, and a lot of them would end up on Netflix. I think Starry Eyes was the first one that really made me think, okay, so we've gotten past the 90s, which is kind of a dead zone to me, at least for horror.
Yeah.
And for kids that grew up in the 90s, I'm sure they look at it the same way I do for 80s or 70s films. Anytime I watch one, I think I just watched I Know What You Did last summer again for the first time in a long time, and it really just didn't do anything for me. But lately, there's kind of been a really big resurgence in good quality horror. And Starry Eyes was kind of the first one that really made me think, okay, there's got to be more good stuff out there. Even more so this last year, it just seems like it's really taken off with things like Mandy and Suspiria, the remake. And then this year, we've got the new Jordan Peele movie coming up and things like that. So
that's Us, isn't it? I think is that the one? Yeah. So obviously horror is a really keen part of your history and what you had growing up there. So yeah, you mentioned in one of your podcasts about the element of the likes of one of my favourite directors, David Lynch, and you've recently done a podcast with Mike White as well with Eraserhead. So yes. As you mentioned there, that the more surreal aspects of horror, I mean, is there a particular type? I mean, you're saying that surreal is probably your most favourite, and obviously the 90s stuff, like, well, you know, I Know What You Did last summer is not really something that really appeals to you. But from my point of view, I'm not a massive horror fan, but I didn't perceive The Thing as a horror movie, strangely enough. Yeah. Because I love my sci-fi, and I came at that from a sci-fi point of view with, you know, there's just some really gruesome and out there moments in there. So taking the genre as a whole, is there any particular aspects that you really enjoy, or stuff that it's kind of like, it's not for me within the genre itself?
Well, the stuff that I tend to gravitate toward does seem to be the things that are kind of slightly off. And I think the first two that I talked about, Phantasm and Tourist Trap, have that almost unintentionally surreal feel to them where things just aren't quite right. And as a kid, I didn't really understand why they weren't quite right. And a lot of it just had to do with, like with Phantasm, it had to do with that they took big chunks of it out. And so you're missing connections that probably would have been there. And it just feels like a dream, and it was intentionally supposed to feel like a dream, but there's both intentional and unintentional things that happen in that movie that make it just a little bit off. And so a lot of the genre that I keep going back to of psychological horror with the hysterical women and different things like that were big in the 70s, it's just more of an unsettling feeling that I tend to enjoy. I mean, I like the gore and stuff, but I'm not a gore hound. Doesn't have to be. Tourist Trap has like zero blood in it, but it's creepy and weird and just off kilter. So that tends to be the stuff that I gravitate toward, and probably why slasher films aren't that high up on my list.
Right.
Because those are more straightforward supernatural aspects, but they're not weird.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure people could argue some sequels, I guess Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is kind of weird. I mean, the first Nightmare on Elm Street is weird, and I like that one the most because it's dreamlike. It's not so much about Freddy throwing out one-liners. It's just about the kind of blurring between waking and sleeping and all that makes that one successful to me.
As I say, I'm not a huge horror fan, but I do like psychological thrillers, and I do like things with elements of the unknown or the surreal. Like as I say, the David Lynch stuff is really good because it makes you think, and I like things that aren't explicitly explained to you. So some of the slasher ones for me really aren't really for me. I'm not really that interested in them, but I would always go back to them. And if somebody said, no, you need to watch this one because it's got an element that you like, which you like now. I'm trying to think of the film that I've been told to watch recently, which was the Donald Sutherland film with the girl in the red coat. Was it?
Yeah, Don't Look Now.
Don't Look Now, yeah. And I really, really enjoyed that film. That's down my street. That's the sort of thing that I really am really into.
Yeah, that showed up on Shudder over here, and it had been on there, I think, a couple of years ago, and I, for some stupid reason, didn't watch it, and watched it a couple weeks ago, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember really, really liking this movie, and still really, really enjoy it. And it's barely horror. I mean, I think the last 5 minutes are about the only thing that could be considered horror.
Yeah.
But the dynamics between the two of them and the strange editing and the flash forwards and all, you're unsettled and not totally sure what's going on. And that's the kind of stuff that's really intriguing to me.
Yeah.
That's a great movie.
Yes, well, I absolutely loved it. And you mentioned the flash forwards. I mean, I'm a stickler for those type of things. I love repeating films. I love likes of Groundhog Days and various other things like that. And I love anything that kind of throws you off edge on that way. And I would prefer that over something that's gory. As you say, it's certainly something that's great that you've got the aspects of surrealism, sci-fi, you've got psychological thrillers in there. Everything you can throw at the horror genre, you could potentially find something from it. Now, you decided to get into the podcasting world. What was the major factor in that, and how did you go about your first recording? How did you research what was going on in the past? Did you look at what other people were doing? How did the podcasting world enter your life?
I have Facebook, I think, again, to blame for starting this whole thing. It was 10 movies over 10 days, and you were just supposed to post the poster or a picture and not talk about it.
Right.
That's kind of the rule. And I wasn't really tagged by anyone. I just saw everybody doing it and I did it, but I couldn't not write something about the movies. I thought, well, maybe I start a blog or something because I really like talking about movies.
Yeah.
But I don't have anyone to talk to about movies. And I don't see my friend as often as I would like. And well, what could I do? And I kind of jokingly at one point said to my wife, let's go find a decent digital camera. I'll do a movie review show. You can do a workout show, and our daughter can do a little toy video review. And who knows, maybe we'll make a little bit of extra cash or something. And quickly realized I don't want to do a video review show, and just bothering with the clips even. And I mean, it just seemed like it entailed a little bit more knowledge than I had. And also just hearing about people with getting their stuff pulled from YouTube for copyright infringement. I didn't want to get involved in any of that. And I thought, well, we listen to podcasts in the car. I didn't listen to very many on my own. I would try a few, kind of maybe not care for the dynamic of that particular show. And other than the ones that we would listen to in the car as a family, like Lore and Myths and Monsters, I think is the other one. Yeah, I didn't really listen to that many. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to listen to some, but I don't want to listen to the point where I am regurgitating the same types of thing or aping anybody's style, or, I didn't want to be too heavily influenced by anything in particular. And I think I did a search for 10 best movie podcasts, and not even horror, just movies in general. And one that came up was The Faculty of Horror. And I read the description and I thought, oh, this might be a good place to start because it's totally different than what I have in mind to do for myself. And it was done by two women, which I thought, well, that's good too, to get another totally different viewpoint from my own. And it's academic. So that was a good place to start. And I listened to a bunch of theirs and realized, oh, they're running clips, so I can do that. Just an audio clip is fine. And that kind of started the whole process. And then I went to YouTube and watched GarageBand tutorials and things like that on how to get started at least. And it didn't seem to be that difficult. And then I realized, oh yes, the computer in our spare bedroom is a Mac and it has GarageBand on it. So I just went and started fiddling around and did some really early versions of what I ended up doing as full episodes. I think I started with the Eraserhead and just kind of sat there and talked into the computer for an hour and a half.
That was something I was going to pick up on as well, because your style so far, we recently had Mike White on for Eraserhead as it happens, but has been that you were podcasting solo. Was that a conscious choice at the beginning of the outset, or was it just purely because you just wanted to get your head round the way of a podcast and the way that you wanted it to run?
It was mainly by default. I figured that you needed a co-host, and I thought, who in the world am I going to get to co-host this? And getting a hold of friends and nailing down a time when you're both free was going to be virtually impossible. And I thought, well, I'll just start and do the first couple on my own and see how that goes. I don't know of many movie podcasts that do. I can't even think of one that's just a solo act that isn't kind of like what you do, where they have a guest every week or something. Yeah. Where it's just one guy or girl talking about a movie. I don't know. That may just be because I still don't have a very wide list that I listen to, but I haven't come across one yet. There are, I know, like I mentioned Lore, and that's just that guy talking the whole time. It's more of telling a story, but I figured, well, you know what, I'll just give it a shot and see what happens. And I've asked a few people and it just hasn't lined up yet. Right. And I probably wouldn't have done anything yet if I was waiting on other people. So
yeah, you've got to get started somewhere. Yeah, and also as well, just while we're on that subject, so far you've done them on your own. There was one particular one that you've done with Mike White, again, as a Razorhead, and another one with your daughter, which I found was amazing. And she's a great interviewer. And if she ever needs to co-host for me or cover for me, I think I'll be in touch. Which I thought was really, really good. I thought that she did really well. And that was a nice little introduction to the show. Was that something that you had asked her to do, or did she want to get involved? How did that all come about?
I think I asked her. I had done probably like 5 different intro episodes, and I just kept talking, and I thought I need a structure to this. I went ahead and wrote out the questions that I ended up having her ask.
Yeah.
We just sat there and recorded her end, and then I went in and answered the questions afterwards. So she gets a kick out of it. I don't know if it's something that she wants to do all that often with me, but I had her do a few extra things for the Eraserhead one. And if something pops into my head where I need a break or a kind of a segue into a different topic or something, then I'll ask her, will you record something with me? And, she's 11, so I think she's happy to be asked, but then acts impatient and, like it's a bother or something after a while. So
yeah. You mentioned there that you were talking about the sections and breaks and things. That was something that I had noticed listening to the podcast, was that you do have these parts and you do have sections that are broken up by either using clips or by saying part 1 and part 2. And especially with I know we talked about Eraserhead, that rather than go down what many people would consider the usual route of having the guest on and talking about it and the guest goes and you finish off, it was actually, it was in the middle of the podcast itself, so there's been a considerable, I think it was about 35 minutes before Mike was introduced. So how do you go about thinking about split it into parts and the sections that you've put it in? What were the thought processes behind that?
With Eraserhead in particular, it was, I have to have some kind of structure or I'll just blather on about things, which is probably what happens anyway. I don't know why I stuck that in the middle, to be honest with you. I knew I had recorded something and then I think I trashed it. And I thought, well, let's see what we talk about. And then I can kind of gear the solo stuff around that and not try to duplicate too much. And I ended up taking quite a bit out of the conversation on my end because I knew that I would talk about it more in depth on my own. Some things that we didn't get to that were key points for me. It just didn't come up in the conversation with Mike. I felt like I was sort of aping Projection Booth with that. It seems like their interviews come sort of late in the episode. So maybe that was just what I was thinking. I'll copy him on that since he's on it.
He's certainly a good one to copy, put it that way. And with regards to clips, I know it's something that some people do and some people don't. Was there a conscious effort on your part to put clips into the production? Yeah,
I did think it was important. I like it. And like I said, when I first started listening to Faculty of Horror, I thought, okay, they're doing it. It makes sense to do it on an audio thing instead of a video review.
Yeah.
And on some of theirs, when they were doing foreign films, they were playing audio and I'm like, well, no subtitles, but I don't care. That's cool. I'll listen to this French language version of the clip here and not know what's going on, but that's perfectly fine. Obviously, you want to do it when it's interesting dialogue or something maybe funny or gross or scary or whatever. Also to kind of give a break from me just talking. I think it's worked for the most part in the episodes. I try to keep it short. I don't want to go on forever. I think with the Eraserhead, there wasn't too much in there.
Yeah.
Because there, for one thing, isn't a lot of dialogue. And when there is dialogue, there are long pauses between.
Yeah, the Lynchian pause.
Yeah. Even more so in that movie. I always had it in my head that there's like 12 lines of dialogue, but I actually counted, when I watched it before I did that, and I think there was about 70 lines of dialogue or something like that. And then if I have it on DVD all loaded up, onto the computer and I just record the audio. I don't have any special tools.
Right.
I think there's something you can get to rip audio off of YouTube, but I'll either use my disc. If it's streaming, I'll use that version, or if I have to go to YouTube, I'll do that. And I just record the audio onto GarageBand.
Right, yeah.
I think I finally realized I needed to do it a little bit louder. It seems like it automatically drops a couple of decibels when you do that through GarageBand, and finally realized I needed to up it a little bit. I mean, I can always play with the volume in the track, but it would vary so much. I didn't want to have 10 tracks just for 10 different clips.
The future, moving on to where you foresee the podcast going. Have you reached out to any other podcasters for guesting on your show? Are you going to be doing the show just generally on your own as we speak? What can we expect in the next few months from yourself?
I was going to put a call out on Twitter and like, hey, if there's any female writers or podcasters that want to talk about Taxi Driver, contact me. And I didn't, because I don't know what I'm going to do with the Taxi Driver episode yet. There are a few people that I will be contacting to appear on something. And I had always had in mind to ask people, tell me what your Phantasm was or your tourist trap. What was that horror movie when you were a kid that you caught, either you snuck out of your bedroom and watched, or that you just saw some Saturday afternoon and it really struck a chord, and talk about their recollections of horror as opposed to mine. I'm open to that from anybody that wants to talk about something like that. I'd be more than happy, even if it's a movie that I haven't seen or that I don't like, because I can ask, it doesn't matter what my thoughts are on it if we're doing your movies. So that is definitely an option. And I do have some friends. When are we going to do this? And I think with my friend Ronnie, who is the guy that I was watching movies with back in the 2013 and on, I think we're going to do Rosemary's Baby together. I'm not sure. We haven't really nailed it down. Okay. I'm going to see him this weekend, so maybe we'll talk about it some more. But we've tossed around a couple different movies that we could do. I think we always circle back to Rosemary's Baby. I don't really have anybody specific in mind. I always kind of get a little gun shy about asking somebody. I felt comfortable asking Mike because we had a Twitter and Facebook relationship, and I just was like, he hasn't done Eraserhead yet, and this is going to be kind of the crowning achievement of this season, and it would be helpful if there was someone else on this, because it's such a rich movie. And I mean, I could talk about it for 3 hours, but nobody wants to listen to that.
You've done your first few episodes. You've started doing something called Why Didn't I Rent This? And I thought that's an absolutely brilliant idea. And I like the way that you've done that from the Patreon side. Do you want to just discuss that for a few moments, just to let the audience know what that is and what your thoughts were behind that?
It was because I was seeing movies that were from my childhood that I didn't watch. And I thought, well, I can't do a full episode on that. It doesn't fit the format, which I'm not beholden to. I mean, I did one on Black Christmas, and I didn't see that movie as a kid. For things that I saw in the video store that were intriguing, when I finally watched them as an adult, I'm like, why? And I actually asked him, why didn't I rent this when I was a kid? I mean, I watched The Thing 100 times. I could have taken a week off and watched The Beast Within or Messiah of Evil or something like that. So I thought, well, I'm not going to expand this into a long one because I don't know that much about the movie. I don't have a history with it, and that's part of the main episodes of this show. But I kind of want to talk about it, and I thought, well, maybe I'll just do a review and throw that on the blog. And every time I think that, I just immediately toss that idea aside because it's not, I don't know what it is, but to me, thinking about writing at this point is a total bore.
Right.
I would just rather tinker around with this stuff on the computer and sit here and record and maybe get a 15-minute episode out. And so that was sort of the impetus for that, was just there's a ton of movies that I didn't watch from back then that I've watched now that are great. And it's not costing anybody any money. If I feel like talking about something, I'll talk about it, I guess. The Patreon thing, I guess it's just something that every podcaster ends up doing. And I sort of wasn't sure I would ever do it because, I'm not overwhelmed by response to begin with.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, what's the point of that? There's going to be these episodes that nobody listens to because they're going to have to pay for them. But I thought, well, you know what? Screw it. I'll just go ahead and do it. But I wanted it to be exclusive content. Just because of the way I am, I don't carve out time to listen to episodes early. And that seems to be what a lot of the podcasts do. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think the people, they're obviously doing it because people like to be the first to listen to something maybe. And that idea just didn't appeal to me as a listener or as a podcaster. So I thought, well, I'll just do things that don't fit any formula so far, just something, a new discovery or non-horror or whatever strikes my fancy, I might throw up on there.
It's certainly a good way of looking about it. I think a lot of people would do it one way is to, as many people will know, that you can start a podcast quite cheaply, but it does cost money to host some on certain areas, and by releasing earlier ones, you can obviously reclaim some of that money back. And especially when you get bigger and bigger, then obviously that is a main concern. I decided to do this podcast because I got the bug for being on a podcast and for doing it. And what I naturally felt was I struggled with being a guest, but actually enjoyed hosting and enjoyed interviewing. So hence the reason why this podcast was born. I appreciate you coming on today. It's been absolutely fantastic. I really do appreciate it. Where can people find Wake Up Heavy?
I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as Wake Up Heavy. If you just type in Wake Up Heavy on any social media, it should come up. Patreon is Wake Up Heavy. The blog is wakeupheavy.com. I broke down and bought the domain, and I don't know, didn't make anything easier, I guess, but it's just kind of nice to not have to type in Blogspot. Yeah, any social media platform, it's just all one word, Wake Up Heavy. There isn't a whole lot of other Wake Up Heavy stuff out there, so it's a phrase that comes up every once in a while, I think in reference mainly to people who work out, lift weights, or heavy metal, I think, sometimes. So those are the only other references I've seen with the hashtag. So
all those years ago, you've definitely come up with a unique phrase then.
Yeah, and you know what? It actually lends itself to changing. I was just thinking about this the other day because I will eventually run out of movies that I watched as a kid that left a big impression. It's a finite number.
Yeah.
That's why I had added the subtitle of Recollections of Horror, because that can always change.
Sure. And
the title is so vague, or, there's no reference point to it. I could start talking about all the cult movies that I fell in love with, sort of when I took a break from horror, or just even regular dramas and action movies. So, it's, a little bit harder if your podcast is called Nightmare on Film Street.
Yeah.
So, which is, that's a fine podcast, and there's hundreds of horror movies to talk about. But since I was being so specific about what I was going to start with, I guess it seemed like maybe I shouldn't be so specific with the title.
Mark, thank you so much for coming on to Pick Up a Podcast. Thank you for starting 2019 with a blast with yourself. I look forward to hearing your podcast moving forward. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will no doubt speak to you on Twitter again in the near future. And all the best with your podcast, and we'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kurt, and thank you for taking my suggestion of myself to be on your show. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that I actually contacted you. And
well, the more people that contact me, the better, because it makes my job so much easier. So thank you for that. And again, thank you so much for coming on, and we will speak to you soon. Meanwhile, we are part of the We Made This podcast network. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Have you ever wanted to dive deeper into the horror movies you love? Beyond the Blood is a horror podcast for fans who want more than just surface level screams. We do deep dives into the movies that shaped us, digging into director commentaries, behind the scenes stories, deleted scenes, and the special features that most people skip. Each episode is a love letter to the genre. We break down how these films were made, the creative risks that paid off or didn't, and the lasting impact they've had on the genre as a whole. From 70s slashers to modern nightmares, we celebrate the craft, chaos, and characters that keep us coming back. If you're the kind of fan who rewatches movies with the commentary on, or you simply grew up in the video store horror aisle, the Beyond the Blood podcast was made for you. New episodes every single week. Subscribe, let's dig deep. Welcome to the Beyond the Blood podcast.